The first person who laughed was holding a pretzel. I still remember that because 30 seconds later he dropped it on the polished marble floor and ran so fast he left his own little boy standing there crying. Funny how fear edits a person's priorities. 5 minutes before that, everyone in the Riverside Galleria thought an old security guard had finally lost his mind. They had no idea they were watching the only man in the building who knew exactly what death looked like. My name is Walter Hayes. Back then, I was 68 years old, wearing a faded Navy security jacket that never quite fit across my shoulders anymore, walking slow enough that teenagers joked I needed my own parking space inside the mall. I heard every joke. People think old men stop hearing things once their hair turns gray. We don't. We just get tired of correcting everyone. Riverside Galleria had become my routine after retirement. Every morning I'd unlock the employee entrance before sunrise, grab stale coffee from the break room, nod to the janitors, and make my first lap before the stores opened. The younger guards called me Grandpa Walt. Some meant it respectfully. Others didn't bother hiding the sarcasm. It never bothered me much. I'd already lived through enough years to know that respect earned slowly lasts longer than respect demanded loudly. Our operations manager, however, was a different story. His name was Dylan Mercer, 35 years old, expensive haircut, polished shoes, always talking about customer experience and social media ratings like those mattered more than keeping people alive. He loved saying security should be invisible because visible security scared shoppers. Every staff meeting sounded the same. Smile more. Wave more. Don't create unnecessary panic. Don't inconvenience paying customers. He wasn't a bad man, at least not intentionally. He was simply too young to understand that disasters don't schedule appointments. They arrive disguised as ordinary afternoons. That Saturday, the mall was packed, shoulder to shoulder. Families crowded around a children's science exhibit in the central atrium, while a local radio station blasted music through oversized speakers. Kids chased balloons. Couples carried shopping bags from every direction. Someone was giving away free smoothie samples. It looked exactly like the kind of afternoon corporate headquarters loved using in promotional videos. Around 1:13, during my usual patrol, something interrupted the rhythm I'd spent years teaching myself to notice. A black duffel bag sat beside a decorative planter near the fountain. Nothing unusual about luggage in a mall, until I stopped walking. I watched it. People streamed around it like water around a rock. Nobody touched it. Nobody looked at it twice. A woman pushing a stroller passed within inches. A teenage couple leaned against the planter taking selfies. The bag never moved. I checked my watch. Then, I stepped behind a nearby pillar where I could see without being obvious. 5 minutes passed, then 8, then 12. Still nobody claimed it. Years ago, someone had once asked me how you recognize danger before everyone else does. The answer is simple. Most people look at objects. Trained people look at patterns. Patterns tell stories. That bag had become invisible because everyone assumed somebody else owned it. I knew better. I quietly approached a maintenance worker named Luis. "Did you see who left that bag?" He frowned, looked toward the planter, then shook his head. "Been there a while. Thought somebody was shopping." That answer tightened something in my chest. I radioed dispatch. "Control, this is Hayes. I need surveillance on a black duffel in the main atrium. Check the last 15 minutes. The response came back slower than I liked. "Standby." I didn't have time for standby. I started asking people to move away casually, keeping my voice calm. "Folks, let's give this area a little room. Appreciate it. Thank you." Most ignored me. A few actually stepped closer because curiosity always beats common sense. That's when Dylan spotted me from the second-floor balcony. I watched him march downstairs with that familiar, irritated expression managers wear when they think someone is embarrassing the company. "Walter," he called before he even reached me. "What exactly are you doing?" I pointed toward the bag. "Nobody's claimed it." 12 minutes. Maybe longer. "We need to clear this section." He actually laughed. "You're shutting down half my atrium over a forgotten gym bag. I'm asking you to trust my judgment. Your judgment is costing stores money." A few shoppers slowed down to watch. Someone lifted a phone and started recording. Dylan spread his arms dramatically. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't worry. Everything is fine. Our security officer here has an overactive imagination." Laughter rolled through the crowd. A teenager muttered, "Guess Grandpa watched too many action movies." Another man clapped sarcastically. I ignored them all and kept my eyes on the bag. Dylan stepped closer until we were almost nose to nose. "Listen carefully," he whispered. "If you keep causing a scene, you're done." I'll terminate you before your shift ends." I looked past him toward the children still playing beside the fountain, then back at him. I'd rather lose my job than attend their funerals. His smile disappeared for half a second before returning. Quieter this time. "Touch that bag and you're fired." I nodded once. "Then, fire me." I walked past him, knelt beside the duffel, took one slow breath, and pulled the zipper open barely 2 inches. Everything inside me went cold. If you want to continue the story, the first thing I saw wasn't wires. It wasn't blinking lights either. Movies get that part wrong. What I saw was organization. Layers packed with a kind of deliberate precision I'd spent nearly 2 decades learning to recognize. Whoever built that device understood exactly what they were doing, and in that instant, every sound around me seemed to disappear. The music from the stage faded. The chatter vanished. Even Dylan's voice dissolved into the background. Training does that to you. Your brain narrows until only the next correct decision exists. I slowly stood up, looked directly at Dylan, and for the first time since he'd hired me, I didn't see an operations manager. I saw another civilian standing too close to something he couldn't begin to understand. "Everybody out, now." My voice came out calm, almost quiet. Dylan rolled his eyes. "Walter, stop embarrassing yourself." I didn't even look at him. I took one step toward the fountain, and everything I'd buried for nearly 20 years came rushing back. Dust, heat, burned metal. Young soldiers waiting for instructions that couldn't come a second too late. My voice returned exactly the way it had sounded back then. "Everybody out! Move! Leave! Everything! Now!" The atrium froze. Mothers instinctively grabbed their children. A few people laughed again, but this time the laughter sounded uncertain. I pointed toward the nearest exit. "Do not run. Walk fast. Keep moving. Stay away from the center." Luis immediately understood something was wrong. He dropped his mop without asking questions and started helping families toward the doors. 2 teenage security guards stared at me with wide eyes. "You two," I barked. "Open every emergency exit. Nobody uses elevators. Move." They didn't hesitate. Maybe it was the tone. Maybe it was the look on my face. Either way, they moved before Dylan could stop them. Dylan reached for my shoulder. "I'm ordering you to stop." I brushed his hand away. "Call 911. Tell them suspected explosive device. Request bomb squad immediately." "You're insane." "Maybe. But if I'm wrong, you'll have a very inconvenient afternoon. If I'm right, you'll still have an afternoon." That finally reached him, not because he believed me, but because uncertainty had crept into his confidence. Around us, panic began spreading in uneven waves. Someone screamed. Another person saw people moving and assumed the worst. Store employees pulled down metal gates while parents searched for missing children. Shopping bags scattered across the marble floor. The smell of cinnamon pretzels mixed with perfume and fear. I kept directing people away from the atrium, repeating the same instructions over and over because frightened crowds don't process complicated information. "Keep walking. Don't push. Help the person beside you. Keep moving." An elderly woman stumbled near the escalator. I caught her before she hit the ground. A little girl stood crying beside the fountain, frozen in place while adults rushed around her. I picked her up and carried her toward the exit until her mother spotted us, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," I answered. "Just keep going." Within minutes, police cruisers flooded the parking lot. Sirens echoed through the emptying mall. Officers established a perimeter while firefighters blocked surrounding roads. I remained exactly where I was, well outside the danger zone now, watching the bag through the front glass entrance. Dylan stood nearby, pale as paper, trying desperately to explain himself to responding officers. He overreacted. We weren't sure. There wasn't any evidence. Nobody paid much attention. Then a black SUV rolled onto the scene. Out stepped a woman in tactical gear with silver hair tucked beneath her helmet. She walked toward the entrance, scanning the building before her eyes landed on me. She stopped. For a second, she simply stared. Then she smiled, the smallest smile I'd seen in years. "Well, I'll be damned," she said softly. "Walter Brennan." I hadn't heard my full name spoken like that in a long time. "Captain Rachel Donnelly," I answered. She shook her head. "You old stubborn son of a gun. I heard you retired. Tried it. Didn't suit me." She laughed once, then her expression hardened. "You looked inside? Just enough? Assessment? Professional construction. Whoever assembled it understood anti-handling precautions. Assume secondary threats." She didn't question my judgment for even a second. She turned toward her team. "Lock everything down. Nobody enters until we clear the structure." A television reporter standing nearby overheard our conversation. Cameras immediately swung toward us. One young journalist asked Rachel, "Do you know this security guard?" She looked almost offended by the question. "Know him? This man spent 18 years in explosive ordnance disposal. He trained officers who now lead bomb units across 3 states." The microphones lowered. Every face around us changed. Rachel continued before anyone else could speak. "If Walter Brennan tells you to evacuate a building, you don't debate him. You move." I noticed Dylan standing 20 feet away listening to every word. His face had lost all color. The confidence, the sarcasm, the corporate polish, gone. Just a frightened man realizing he'd nearly ignored the one person qualified to recognize what everyone else missed. The bomb technicians disappeared inside wearing heavy protective suits. Time stretched strangely after that. 5 minutes felt like an hour. Nobody talked much. Parents hugged children tighter. Employees gathered in small groups whispering theories. Some of the same people who had laughed earlier avoided looking at me altogether. One teenage boy approached quietly. "Sir," he said, staring at the ground. "I'm sorry about what I said." I smiled. "You'll get older too. Just try to get wiser at the same time." He nodded without another word. Nearly 40 minutes later, Rachel emerged from the building carrying her helmet beneath one arm. Her face alone told me everything. "Confirmed," she said. "Live device." The surrounding officers fell silent. Even the reporter stopped talking. Rachel continued. The timer had approximately 12 minutes remaining when evacuation began. The building remained occupied. She didn't finish the sentence because she didn't need to. Everyone imagined the ending themselves. Television crews immediately broke into live coverage. Headlines started appearing online before sunset. "Hero security guard prevents catastrophe." "Elderly mall guard saves hundreds." None of those headlines felt accurate. I hadn't saved anyone alone. Training had. Discipline had. Every instructor who ever yelled at me for missing details decades earlier had saved those people too. Dylan slowly walked toward me, stopping a few feet away. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Walter?" He searched for words that never came. Finally, he said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. Being sorry is a good start. Learning something is better. Before he could answer, internal affairs investigators approached him requesting a formal statement. By the end of the evening, corporate headquarters had suspended him pending investigation for interfering with an active security response. The cell phone video of our confrontation had already spread across social media. Millions of people watched him threaten to fire me, then watched me open the bag anyway. But none of that stayed with me nearly as much as what happened an hour later. While Rachel's technicians carefully dismantled the device, she suddenly called my name. There was something different in her voice this time. Not relief, not admiration, concern. I walked over as she carefully held up a folded piece of laminated paper sealed beneath the explosive components. "Walter," she said quietly, "you need to look at this." I unfolded it. It was a detailed floor map of Riverside Galleria. Every hallway, every emergency exit, every maintenance corridor. Near the food court, someone had drawn a perfect red circle with permanent marker. Beside it, just 2 handwritten words. Phase 2. My stomach dropped. Whoever planted the first bag had never expected it to explode alone. If you want to continue to the final chapter and discover what waited at that second red circle, Rachel didn't say another word after handing me the map. She didn't have to. The moment I saw that red circle over the food court, every instinct I'd spent years trying to leave behind came flooding back. Whoever built the first device wasn't trying to destroy a building. They were trying to control people. The first bomb would create panic. The second would catch the crowd exactly where they thought they were safe. I'd seen that strategy before, and I hated that I recognized it. "Evacuate the outer parking lots," I told Rachel immediately. "If there's another device, they'll want people funneled together." She nodded before I even finished the sentence and began issuing orders over her radio. Officers who had just started relaxing suddenly sprinted back into motion. Firefighters redirected families farther across the street. News crews were pushed behind another perimeter. The entire scene transformed again. Only this time, nobody questioned why. Fear had replaced skepticism. Rachel looked at me. "Think you can help us read whoever did this?" I studied the map one more time. Not who. How. Whoever planted this wanted responders focused on the atrium. The second location isn't random. It's where frightened people naturally gather after evacuation. We hurried through maintenance blueprints spread across the hood of a police SUV. The food court sat above a service corridor connecting electrical rooms. Ventilation access. And delivery docks. Too many hiding places. Too many blind spots. Then one young technician noticed something everyone else had missed. The red circle wasn't centered on a restaurant. It was centered on a public trash compactor tucked behind a decorative wall almost nobody noticed. There, I said. That's where I'd hide it. The robot rolled in first. Every officer held their breath as its camera disappeared behind the wall. 30 long seconds passed. Then Rachel's headset crackled. Possible package located. Nobody celebrated. We all knew possible was enough. The bomb unit worked with the same patience they always had. Slow movements, measured breathing, absolute discipline. Nearly an hour later, Rachel walked back toward us and removed her helmet. She looked exhausted, but she was smiling. "You were right," she said. Second device recovered. I closed my eyes for a second longer than I meant to. It wasn't relief exactly. Relief comes when something is over. What I felt was gratitude. Gratitude that hundreds of families would drive home arguing about where to eat dinner instead of identifying loved ones in a temporary morgue. That's a very different kind of victory. The investigation lasted months. Federal agencies took over before sunrise the next morning. Security footage eventually identified the suspect entering through a loading entrance wearing a maintenance uniform purchased online. The case remained sealed for a long time, so I never learned every detail. And honestly, I stopped asking. Some answers belong in courtrooms, not in old men's memories. Dylan visited me about 3 weeks later. Not at the mall. At my little house with the white porch swing my late wife had picked out years before. He stood there holding a grocery bag and looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. "I figured homemade pie wasn't enough," he joked nervously, lifting the bag. "So I brought coffee too." We sat on the porch until sunset. He admitted he'd spent his entire career believing confidence meant having all the answers. That day taught him confidence sometimes means listening to the quietest person in the room. Before leaving, he asked me one question I'll never forget. "How did you know everyone was laughing at the wrong thing?" I smiled because the answer had become simpler with age. Experience doesn't always arrive wearing a suit people respect. He nodded slowly. A month later, the mall offered me a public recognition ceremony. Local politicians wanted photographs. Television stations wanted interviews. I declined almost all of them. I accepted one small plaque because Luis insisted the break room wall looked empty without it. That's where it still hangs today, collecting more dust than attention. Every now and then, a young security officer stops by my chair and asks what really happened that afternoon. I never start with the bomb. I start with the laughter, because that's the part people need to remember. Danger is frightening, but arrogance is far more dangerous. The bomb didn't almost kill those families. Pride nearly did. So the next time an older mechanic tells you your brakes don't sound right, or an experienced nurse says something feels off, or a quiet security guard asks you to move away from a forgotten bag, maybe don't spend your first 5 seconds deciding whether they look important enough to believe. You never really know what someone has survived before they crossed your path. And now I'd genuinely like to hear your opinion. Was Dylan simply inexperienced, or should he have been held legally responsible for ignoring a trained professional during a potential emergency? What would you have done if you had been standing in that atrium when everyone else started laughing? Let me know down in the comments. If this story made you think differently about judging people by appearances, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs the reminder that real heroes rarely look the way movies tell us they should.